everybody. It's week 23 at the Victory Garden. And this week we are in the kitchen, as you can see. And we're going to just try out a really simple, basic marinara sauce today. Something you can use either fresh or frozen tomatoes. We're going to use the frozen ones that we harvested out of the garden this summer. And you know, we're just kind of feeling this thing out. We've been doing the gardening, but we haven't done a cooking segment before, so this is going to be kind of a new one for us.
Here we are, not in the garden, in the kitchen, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about what might help you be a little more successful with your cooking, depending on if you're really good at cooking or you really love cooking, or if you're just like not super experienced cooking with, you know, vegetables you've grown yourself. Hopefully this will give you some good ideas. And I really like to start with all my ingredients around, make sure that I have a nice cleaned off space, and know that I have all of my equipment and utensils clean and ready to go, so there's no frustration when you're halfway through a recipe and realize you need something that you don't have or it's dirty. And then one other tip, so we've got our spices, our ingredients, we've got all of our equipment here laid out, and one more tip is with our cutting board. We want to make sure that this is a really good surface, really solid, so that we can cut safely on it. And if you can see, this table is kind of slippery, so our cutting board is kind of wobbling around, which isn't going to be very safe when we're cutting on it. So one tip is to get a paper towel or just a cloth towel, get it wet, and then put it underneath your cutting board. And now our cutting board is going to be really nice and firm, and it's not going to slide around, so it's going to be safer to cut some of those round vegetables. And we're going to start out by just cutting up some of our aromatics, some of our like onions and garlic and other vegetables that we want to add first to give our tomato sauce a little more flavor. Alright, so we've just got a yellow onion. Maybe you grew onions this year, maybe not. They're good storage crops, so there's lots of them available at this time of year. So first, I'm just going to cut off either end of the onion. And now I've got a little bit of a flat side that I can put down so it's not rolling around. And then the next thing I'm going to do, rather than peeling it right away, is I'm going to cut it in half. And that way I find it's a little bit easier to get that outer peel off. And now I'm going to lay it flat side down just so it doesn't wobble around. And there's a lot of different techniques for how to do this. So Sue is going to cut an onion also, and we're going to kind of just see how our different techniques are. Maybe something feels more comfortable to you, so go with whatever you're most experienced with or whatever feels right. So I'm just going to slice it, and then when it gets kind of close to my fingers, I'm going to flip it over and just kind of slice it again. And I'm making sure that my fingers are a little bit curved when I'm using the knife. They're not sticking out like this, because this way I can make sure that the blade never cuts the tip of my finger off, which is pretty important. And I've got these slices here, so I'm just going to kind of line them up, and then I'm just going to cut them into little dice by cutting perpendicular to my previous cut.
Thanks, Sal. As it turns out, Sal and I actually cut onions exactly the same way. So the only things I'm going to add are that I usually have a compost bowl right here so that I can put peels and you know, any discards away right away. And then Sal and I are both just putting the onions into a bowl here. And part of what we're going to do, which is just kind of a way to make your whole cooking experience more enjoyable, is if you not only stage your ingredients, but if you also have some containers so that you can, you know, once you've cut up your onions, you can put them all in a bowl. That way, then we're going to move on to our garlic. We can put that in a separate bowl because that's going to go into the pan at a different time. Another ingredient that we're going to use is garlic, and there's a lot of different ways to use garlic, and depending on you know, kind of how you want your finished sauce. Some people like to mince it up real small. I tend to do one of two things. I'll either cut it into large chunks and saute it till it's soft, or I'll just smash it and peel it. So I'm going to show you that technique. So you just take the side of your knife, you smash the clove with the peel still on it, and once you've smashed it, the peel just comes right off. Now I'm going to just real rough chop this and call it good. If you don't want to end up finding chunks of garlic in your sauce, you could mince it more finely, or you could blend your sauce later. But that's my garlic technique, so maybe Sal's got one. We'll see.
Yeah, so my technique, I would say, is pretty similar to Sue's, although I am a little bit more aggressive with it. My goal is to not have to cut it with a knife at all, because it's just so small, it's kind of tedious to mince garlic. So I usually just give it a good smash until it's as flat as I can get it, and then just take that peel off. And it's a pretty flat garlic clove here. And then if you don't really feel comfortable doing that, but you want to try that technique, you can always skip the knife and skip the sharp edges, and you can use something just like a soup cup, and you can just kind of just smash it like that.
You can also add a lot of different vegetables to your sauce. One thing I really like to add are carrots. A lot of commercial sauces that you buy, they add sugar to them. The sugar adds a little sweetness and takes some of the little bitter bite out of the tomatoes. If they're not, if tomatoes aren't cooked a really long time, they can have a little bit of a bitter edge to them. And anyway, a lot of commercial sauces have sugar in them, but if you add something like carrots, that can really add to the sweetness of the sauce. And again, it's like all of your ingredients. How rough you chop them is totally up to you. I'm going to chop these kind of on the large size, and I'm going to just throw them in the bowl with the onions, because I'm going to put them in the pan at the same time as the onions. So this would also be a good time to get ready if you're going to use any peppers, red, yellow, green, orange peppers. Once you have your ingredients all ready and everything chopped, then it's time to start getting it cooked up. So we're going to use olive oil. I really like to use olive oil. You want to heat your oil up first, so that your oil is hot before you put your onions in. And you don't want to be shy with olive oil. It's, you can make yourself feel better by knowing that it's good for you. So we're going to let this get hot. You don't want it to be on super high heat. I'm going to say medium to medium high. If your oil starts smoking, you're a little bit too hot, and so you're going to want to turn it down. Once your oil is hot, the first thing that's going to go in are the onions and any other kind of harder vegetables. So I've got the carrots in here as well. So we're just going to put those in the olive oil and let those cook for a while. They say until they're translucent. That's, they start to get kind of that almost clear. And that's because it really is going to bring out the flavor if you let them cook in the olive oil for a little while. I'm not going to add the garlic until a little later. Now, our garlic is in pretty large pieces, so we can add it earlier. If you mince your garlic, you're not going to want to add it until quite late in the onion saute process, because the smaller pieces can burn quite easily. But we're going to just add the garlic at this point, and you definitely don't want your garlic to start to turn brown, because that'll bring out kind of a, how would you describe that flavor? Yeah, kind of a bitter flavor if you let your garlic start to brown.
So another good tip is to season things as you go. A lot of times you might not, think about what flavors you're really going for until kind of later on in the recipe, but it really helps to bring out these flavors if you keep just adding seasonings and spices as you go, and then just also taste as you go to see if you like where you're going with it, or if you need to add a few other ingredients to make it taste a little bit better. So we have a couple different herbs and spices that we're going to add to our sauce just to get it really nice and flavorful. Another one of our Victory Garden plants is basil. So this is some basil that I dried. I've got a dehydrator at home. So I just put the whole leaves in the dehydrator. Otherwise you can do this in an oven at a very, very low heat. If your oven can get below 200 degrees, you can dry your herbs in your oven. So we've got some basil, and another thing is if you're buying these at the store, you want to get fresher herbs. The fresher they are, the more flavor they're going to have. So that's why doing your own home dried herbs is really awesome. You can get really good flavors. But if you're buying them at the store, just try to find the freshest herbs with the furthest out expiration date you can, and those are going to be really packed with flavor. So for our kind of Italian style marinara sauce, we're going to go with, I would say, some of the greener herbs. So we've got oregano here. We've also, you could put thyme in it, and then our basil. And so I'm gonna just add maybe about a tablespoon of each, since we've got about a gallon of tomatoes to add. And then we can taste it after we add the tomatoes and see if we need to add some more herb flavorings. But this is just gonna really help in the olive oil. It's gonna help the flavors to bloom. So another tablespoon of basil in there, and then I'm going to switch to a teaspoon for our other seasonings. So we've got some chili pepper flakes. If you like a little bit of heat, it kind of helps really round out that flavor, especially if you've got a little bit of sweetness in your sauce, and a little bit of heat can be nice. So we're gonna go with just a half teaspoon to start, because I'm not sure how hot these chili flakes are gonna be. And then also, if you've got like a garlic or an onion powder, that can help just amplify this. Or if you're not getting that garlic and onion flavor as strongly as you'd like later on when you taste it, you can always just add a little bit of this. So we're just going to add maybe a quarter teaspoon just to kind of bring that out. Now I'm going to stir it. And you can see our onions are starting to get a little bit brown, which is perfect, and they're getting a little bit translucent. But our garlic is still not browning, so it is not overcooking at all. It's not getting burnt. And we're just going to stir this around. So our seasonings are just really starting to get mixed in really well and just starting to flavor the whole dish. And then we are just about ready to add our tomatoes. And I definitely don't want to forget our salt and pepper. So salt is something that, you know, you don't want to have too much salt in your diet, but a little bit of salt is going to really help to bring out all of the flavors. And salt is something that I like to add right away. That gives it enough time to permeate the dish, because if you're adding salt right at the end, the tendency can be to not really taste it right away, so you add too much salt, and then by the time you bring it to the table, the salt is just kind of become a really overpowering flavor, just a little more salty than you'd like. So we're just going to just do a couple pinches here of salt. So say 3 pinches, so that's probably, you know, quarter teaspoon again. And then I really like black pepper, so I put probably a lot more than some people might in their dishes. I'm just going to throw in a couple pinches of that, stir it around, and looks like it looks and it smells like we are ready to start adding our tomatoes.
So here's the beauty of, these are some of our frozen tomatoes, and I had just kind of rough chopped these before I threw them in, and it's really handy for making a sauce. So at this point I am going to turn up the heat really high, and what's going to happen is they're going to thaw, and at the same time there's going to be a lot of evaporation of the moisture, and so these are going to cook really fast. And these, again, these were from our garden out back, and they were just rough chopped. Now, if you had frozen your tomatoes whole, you could certainly throw them in, turn the heat up, and then as they're starting to soften, you could mash them with a potato masher or break them up in some other way. So here the tomatoes are starting to fall apart. They're starting to get broken apart. I've just been using a big spoon to break them apart. And I've got this on really high heat so that the tomatoes are thawing and we're losing a lot of moisture right away.
So while our tomato sauce is cooking, our marinara sauce, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some variations we can take from here. So I have a sauce right here that is just plain tomatoes, and I wanted this really rich, thick, almost tomato paste-like sauce. So I just cooked this down for hours and hours until it reduced by maybe 75%. So it just really, really condensed. And this, you can see, is a very, very dark red. It's almost like a brownish color. It's just so concentrated. I know that's something that I know some people will just freeze that, like freeze it in little ice cube trays, and then they'll just add that to things and just call it tomato paste. But this is a good just kind of base for some sauces. I wouldn't necessarily put this straight on like a pasta, but this is a really good concentrated tomato flavor. I'm gonna make enchilada sauce out of it. So it's got a lot of that richness, that kind of like earthy flavor is being brought out more. So that's if you want this really, really deep, rich flavor. Otherwise, this sauce here is gonna be just this like wonderful, a little bit fresher flavored sauce. So this is gonna be really nice for pasta sauce. This, you could actually use this as a soup base. We're gonna have some recipes that we'll include at the end for just ideas for other things that you can make with this basic kind of tomato sauce, marinara sauce idea. Okay, and it's gotten a little bit louder in here, you might notice. So our sauce is really hot and it's producing a lot of moisture and evaporation. So we had to turn on the hood system of our commercial kitchen. So that's just pulling away any of the heat. So we apologize for that, and hopefully you're going to be able to hear the rest of our cooking process.
So it's on really high heat and it's losing a lot of moisture. So at this point, you're going to really want to keep a close eye on it because at some point here it's going to be so thick that it could start to scorch. So it should just be a few more minutes yet.
So now that we are just about done with our sauce, I would say this is also a great time to taste it again, and then you can add any finishing seasonings. So you want to make sure that you have a fully seasoned dish before you bring it to the table. You don't have to add anything after it's done cooking. So we're just going to give it a little taste, and it's nice and thick. It smells really good. So some of the tomato flavor is broken down. It's starting to get a little more well mixed with that onion, and the carrot adds that little sweetness that Sue had talked about. So you can use maybe a little bit more salt, and actually if you like things spicy, I think we could add a little bit more pepper flake, but just to make it more widely appealing, we're just going to add a little bit more salt to finish it off, and maybe just a hint of pepper. And that way we've made sure that this sauce tastes exactly how we want it to before we bring it to the table.
So now we're getting to the stage here where this sauce could definitely just be considered done. It's getting pretty thick. Depending on how you like your sauce and what you're going to use it for, you could also cook it down a little bit more. But, yeah.
So what we have here is a very basic marinara sauce with just a little bit of extra added veggies and some herbs and spices. But there are just so many different ways that you can take this basic technique. So you can have this as a sauce over pasta, over rice. Mix in a lot more vegetables. You could certainly add meat. You could add uncooked meat at the very beginning with the onions and the other aromatics and cook that, and then add your tomato sauce later. You could add cooked meat kind of towards the end and just let it warm up and infuse with some of those flavors. Otherwise, great soup base. It's great base for a lot of different tomato-based dishes. Also, by changing up the spices, you can really change up the flavor profile. So I had mentioned that with the really thick sauce, I'm going to make enchilada sauce out of it. So I'm going to add a few more of those like cumin, coriander, a little cayenne pepper, a little bit more of those warming spices to bring out those flavors. With this, it's a much more, Italian flavor with a lot of those green herbs and spices. You can go a little bit, maybe not Wisconsin cuisine. I've recently kind of been doing a little bit more like Moroccan style cooking, so that's where you're really bringing in a few notes of like cinnamon and clove, and it's just really, really interesting when you're used to, a more basic tomato sauce. So there's just so many different things you can do with this, and we'll add some ideas at the end of this so you can really explore your own culinary adventures with your Victory Garden produce. And one final thing is, you don't have to have it as chunky. This is really nice. I really like this really thick, kind of chewy sauce. But if you want it really smooth, if you want to make even like a tomato basil or like a bisque with it, you can use a blender. If you've got a blender that's rated for hot liquids, otherwise you can let this cool down and you can blend it, and then it'll reheat really quickly. So you can make it the day ahead of time and let it cool down overnight, and then before you're ready to serve it, just blend it up and just reheat it really quick. Otherwise, if you have an immersion blender, that's a really nice tool to have because you can just blend it in the pan. Just get a really nice creamy sauce out of it. So those are some ideas for taking variations on this basic tomato sauce. So hope you enjoyed this cooking segment that we did. We just heard a lot of feedback that you guys wanted some recipes or some ideas to go with all this Victory Garden produce you were growing. So we hope that you enjoyed this and maybe learned a little bit. Definitely let us know what you thought, if you want to hear more like this, or just any feedback you've got.
So thanks for joining us. Next week we'll be back out in the garden. We're going to plant some garlic, so if you were interested in planting some, you might want to get some rounded up. And I guess that's it for this week, and we will see you next week out in the garden again. Oh, don't forget to, as always, leave comments below, use the Facebook page, and yeah, thanks again.
See ya.